Good morning, everyone. I'm Graham Allen. I'm the Chief Executive of Anderson Brown. And I'm delighted that so many of you are able to join us at Anderson Brown Wealth for this short webinar this morning on Scotland's economy, and in particular the need for a robust, resilient and wellbeing economy. I'm particularly pleased, though, to be able to introduce to many of you Benny Higgins, the Chairman of AAB Wealth, who joined us at the tail end of last year. But more importantly, on the subject matter for this morning, Benny, as many of you will know, was the chairman of the Advisory Group for Economic Recovery, which was set up by the First Minister to advise government on actions that will make a difference across all sectors and all regions throughout Scotland. And he presented his report at the start of the week and stood beside the First Minister to take questions on that. So it's fantastic to have the opportunity as the chairman of AAB Wealth for us to also be able to hear from Benny direct and ask any questions that you have in relation to what his findings or the findings of the board were. Benny is best known for his career in banking and financial services, and more recently his advisory role to the First Minister in establishing the Scottish National Investment Bank. He currently has roles in sectors as diverse as tech, agriculture, property, the arts and the third sector, as well as being in wealth management, to name but a few. And it's this breadth of experience, I think, that the First Minister sought when looking to engage with business and the wider interests of the country as a whole. As many of you will have seen on Monday, Benny presented the group's findings following the issue of the report and recommendations, and most importantly, challenged government to respond to each of the 25 areas by the end of July. From a business perspective, the challenge to government is one of action, one of collaboration and one of accountability in order to get the economy moving, and we'll be all very keen to hear what their response is. But the report is much further wide-ranging than that, and Benny will cover some of that this morning, I'm sure. Benny, I look forward to what you have to say. I know you're more than happy to answer questions, as I've said, from today's audience. So guys, please feel free to ask the questions on the Q&A tab, and we'll deal with as many as possible at the end of what Benny has to say. So Benny, I'll hand over to you now to hear what you have to say.
Well, thank you, Graham, very much for that generous introduction. Perhaps before I turn to the main matter of today, I'll just say a couple of words about joining AAB in the first instance. When I was approached by Graham, I was aware of the existence of AAB but didn't know the firm well. But having spoken to Graham and others, I realised that it is a firm with an ethos that is consistent with my own, the focus on looking after clients. And also, to be honest, most of the decisions I make in my life are about the quality of people. And I was hugely impressed by Graham and the others that I met in the process. So I'm delighted to be part of it. And Ian, Andy and Vicky are really a really strong team at the heart of AAB Wealth. But turning to my report, so I was asked on the 22nd of April if I would form a group and review the outlook for Scotland's economy beyond the immediate crisis. So that's the best way to describe scope. It's an odd way to do it, to say what it's not, but it's pretty much anything that was beyond the immediate crisis. And I said I would do it, but only if I could do it the way I wanted to do it. And the way I chose to do it was to get around me a very small, purposefully small group of people who were incredibly able, and set up in parallel a dynamic engagement framework where we invited submissions from all parts of society in Scotland. And I personally pretty much toured the country every day, virtually, sitting behind this very desk. And we received 375 submissions. And the group's role was therefore to discuss, challenge and curate those views. And as Graham said, we've produced 25 recommendations. I think government will start to act next week. I don't think they'll wait until the end of July. And I think that the symbolism of that will be very strong. So what did we find? Well, first of all, when coming into this crisis, Scotland had economic challenges. We had relatively full employment, but very low, steady economic growth. There wasn't 1 year since the financial crash when the economic growth in Scotland was higher than the average for the 40 years prior to the crash. We had a narrow export base, low productivity, and the challenges and opportunities that come with climate emergency and the fourth industrial revolution, and of course Brexit. And none of those issues have gone away. So we're still dealing with all the issues we were dealing with before the crisis. And in some cases, certainly Brexit, I would say the outlook is even slightly harder than it might have been before. The other point is that our objective coming in pre-crisis, and I use my words, not government words, was to build a robust well-being economy, an economy that grows, an economy that creates jobs, but an economy that pays full attention to the need to be green, to be sustainable, and to be fair. I think we've got to revisit that objective in the light of the crisis. We also need an economy that's resilient. We've realised how fragile economies around the world have been in this crisis. For many of us, we've been able to work from home, but for many people, the digital infrastructure, for example, isn't strong enough to allow that. So the report points to increasing the resilience of the country, as well as maintaining a focus on a robust wellbeing economy. And then the other big issue is, what's the new starting point? Well, the new starting point is dominated by three themes: inequality, education, and employment. First of all, on inequality, the crisis has shone a light and illuminated the scale of inequality in the country. And it's interesting that the top 50% of people by earnings can work reasonably comfortable from home, 90% can, and for the bottom 50%, 90% cannot work from home. So, but there have been many others, and actually as the restrictions are lifted, I think there will be further inequalities that will be revealed when some people can make more choices for themselves about transport, about where they work, how they go about things. So that's something that has to be tackled. The second one is education. Education is absolutely vital. This needs to be an education-led recovery. I was actually speaking last evening to a very, very good friend of mine called David Hillier, who's the Dean of the Business School at Strathclyde. And he was saying, and I have to say I was quite astonished him saying it, but he said the report this week, because it made such a big thing about the importance of education, the importance of preserving the assets that we've got in colleges and universities, that the sector itself felt a sense of this is what we needed, you know, and it was almost a bit of relief. Now there's a lot of hard work to be done and we've got to find the money, but the idea that education from the start of school all the way through into lifelong learning, which has been talked about so much, but we need to make sure that, first of all, the kids that have missed school will have a learning loss. Now, one of the people in my group was a lady called Anna Vignola, who's the head of the education faculty at Cambridge. And she introduced me to a whole number of studies that demonstrate actually, especially for disadvantaged kids, losing education during normal summer sets them back because they don't get the same stimulus necessarily that other kids get. So this extended period without education can actually have quite long-term effects. So we've got to try and tackle that. We've also got to look at school curriculum. You know, for most of us, we went to school, and if you were good enough at school and you were able enough, you would go to university. It sort of prepared you for the next step. I think we need to prepare kids for the next step in their life too. We need to make sure they've got digital skills. We need to make sure that that apprenticeships and vocational roles are much more in focus. We need to make sure that organisations, businesses around Scotland are encouraged to take on apprentices and perhaps be supported in doing that. And the education sector itself, or the university sector, has to get better at moving from world-class research through into development and onwards to commercialisation. It's an absolute crown jewel, the university education system in Scotland. It's going to be under real existential threat from the absence of so many overseas students, but it's really important that we protect it. And then the third one is as I described in my Monday's address, the tsunami of unemployment heading towards us. There are 127,000 people unemployed in Scotland. That's 30,000 higher than March, so that's the April figure. We have 628,000 people on furlough, and we have 146,000 people on self-employed support. So that's a total of 774,000. If we find that a chunk of those become redundant, it's a big number. So we've got to be ready for a big number, but we've got to intervene to make sure the number's no bigger than it needs to be. I mean, partly it was one of the slightly controversial things in the report that's not really been mentioned much was our recommendation that we shouldn't be pursuing the universal basic income. It would cost a fortune, and I honestly think that whilst there are moral and other arguments for it, most of which I don't actually think work, but nevertheless, this is not the time. We need to use everything we can to invest in jobs. We need to keep people at work, not help people stay out of work. So it's going to be absolutely crucial. And then there's two things that I would say about employment. I'm really fearful for the 16 to 26-year-old group who are coming towards the end of their secondary or tertiary education, or even, in a case in point, one of my kids is 24 and she's probably going to lose her job. She's just joined the job market from university in the last couple of years, and yesterday she was telling me that two of her friends, both with firsts in engineering, I've just been told that the graduate recruitment, the graduate scheme they were joining, have both said that they're going to scrap the scheme for this year. So they're both dropping out as well and having to find other employment. So that's we've just got to make sure that we don't leave that generation, permanently or long-term scarred by this process. And then the other point is that 80% of jobs in Scotland are in the private sector. Actually, interestingly enough, about 43% of those jobs are in companies of less than 50 people. And the reason I say that, and the reason I mentioned it so purposefully to government, is that private sector is got to be a very, very big part of the answer here, and they've got to respect that. I mean, I very directly told the First Minister, and I was very direct in my report and subsequently in my presentation on Monday, that there is a feeling out there that business doesn't think that the government, and the First Minister in particular, pays enough attention to business and the value of business. I'll be quite frank though, I do think the business has to think it's through its own communication with government. I do feel that the government are going to respond to this. Not so many weeks ago, it would have been unthinkable for them all to be racing around saying it was a good idea to liaise better with business and recruit people from business and get people seconded from business. But it's the chat in the corridors of St Andrew's House, I can tell you. So I think business has got to face into that opportunity as well and ask itself if it's doing all the right things. We used in the report an approach of 4 pillars of economic capital. One, the first pillar, the normal one, the one we're all used to, which is financial and physical. The second is natural capital. The third is human capital, and the fourth is social capital. And it's a very interesting lens through which to look at an economy, to look at your balance sheet today and say, what should my balance sheet look like in future? I think we've got to be very careful that we protect what Scotland should stand for in years to come. So I think we need a national prospectus, but I think we also need local prospectuses. So that's why, in terms of economic development, I think we need to push more of the responsibility into the regions. I think Opportunity North East is a wonderful example of what can be done when you've got somebody like Sir Ian Wood involved. But I think HIE and the South of Scotland Enterprise Partnership, I think, are really ready to go, and Scottish Enterprise has got to adapt to support that. We need to work out what kind of Scotland we want. We need to make sure that those sectors that are threatened are properly supported, but we don't chase lost causes, because we're going to have to be very judicious in what we support. I think, Graham, maybe rather than just keep going, I'll maybe stop, and the questions maybe will take me to where the audience would like me to go.
Sure. Thanks, Benny. Let's just start with a straightforward one, because you touched on it there, Benny, in relation to business generally, and I think there had been some suggestion that the findings aren't focused enough on the SME market. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I found this rather tiresome, if I'm really honest. So the reality is that I talk about the relationship between government and business all the time in the report. If you do a word search for SME, it maybe not come up very often. If you do a word search for large PLCs, it won't come up. If you do a word search for large business, it won't come up. 98.2% of businesses in Scotland have got less than 50 employees. So I'm afraid that all of the things I talked about the importance of digital infrastructure, the importance of skills and training, the importance of upskilling, the desire to have a better dialogue between business and government was aimed at business, and most business is actually SME. So maybe if I just used the SME a bit more often, that criticism wouldn't have been levelled, but I don't think it actually, I think it's completely inaccurate.
Thanks. And one of the other questions we received you sort of touched on as well, and I know it's in your foreword to the report itself, but the questions around that we can see from the report that you're identifying a need for a much greater collaboration between business and the government. You've just touched on that there, Benny. But how do we ensure that we attract the right people for what the next normal in a COVID parlance looks like? And I think that the driving here, the question is driving at, so that we don't end up with the same people in roles with government that maybe we've had in the past that haven't achieved what we've wanted.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it takes two to tango here. I think government's got to be up for. I mean, I've said to the First Minister directly, what you've got to watch is you don't get either the usual suspects turning up, or get indeed people that are not senior enough. I mean, I've worked with government as part of my kind of life now for the last 2.5 years, and I have personally found that what you need is people who are able to, I suppose, rock the boat but don't sink the boat. And I think business, if business is asked to, let's say a Standard Aberdeen, for example, was asked to put somebody forward to help with managing equity stakes, then I think they've got to put somebody that they really rate, so that they don't. It's not a hospital pass. It's somebody that they really like. They think they can make a difference, and government's got to give that person space. But I think it needs to be people of a real, marked seniority, because in the early days of working on the bank, I had a few run-ins. But I was determined that I would stick with it, and I was determined that I'd get it done. And right now, I was one of the last things I had to do for the bank was find the first chairman, and Willie Watt's a very respected guy. He's coming in, so he's got a very prominent role in a piece of the apparatus that's going to be crucial. He's hired a chief executive, Ailey McTaggart, who is really outstanding, who's determined that she wants to make a real fist of this. So I think it's up to government to be serious about it, and businesses to be serious about who they are prepared to put on the case.
Great, thanks. Of course, it's not all about business and climate change and the green pillar, in essence, you got in your report. And we have a question here. What can we learn from lockdown to promote sustainable action which will affect climate change sufficiently? This is a much bigger risk to our 16 to 24-year-olds.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I mean, interestingly enough, and it's one of the little one-liners I slipped into my foreword that hasn't really been discussed much, but Scotland has got no chance of meeting these very ambitious net zero targets if we don't deal with transport and agriculture. And we don't really talk about that enough. I think there's also an issue that we need to measure emissions, because if we close down a plant in some part of Scotland that releases emissions, and then we just buy it in from China, where the standards of emission control are much worse, then we're not actually serving any purpose to the world. Now, that's a bit controversial because it's not how people measure it, but I think Scotland can take a lead on things like this. The guy one of the people on my group was a very respected academic in the field of natural capital called Dieter Helm at Oxford. And he thinks that Scotland has every right to believe that it can be the #1 country in the world for natural capital in the broadest sense. But we do have to tackle transport. And I was talking to a guy called Ian Doherty, he's a professor at Stirling, and he's on the Infrastructure Commission with me. And he's very concerned that because of the anxiety about public transport, we're going to have a real bounce back to people, single occupancy cars going all over the place. So I think what we learned during lockdown is that, all of us, and Graham, you and I are good examples, but it's amazing how productive we've been able to be by being in one place. So I think that we've got to try and learn the lessons about how we deal with transport. So I do hope that the green recovery is vital, and it's, as you say, vital for that group of young people and for the rest of us. And we just got to make sure that we take the right steps. Sorry, Graham, you've frozen.
Benny, can you hear me now?
Aye, I can see. Sorry. I think I might be partly demonstrating the need to invest in rural digital infrastructure, but
yeah, I don't know what happened there, but it's definitely the new way for technology that it is going to fail at times, and now we've all had 3 months or so to find ways around it and get back on, whereas 3 months ago we'd have had a meltdown.
Absolutely. Sorry, I don't know where we got to before I dropped out or you dropped out. I don't know what happened.
No, well, you were kind of finishing off in terms of the the climate change piece, etc. In terms of ensuring that smaller business survives without redundancies, there's a question here: will there be changes in VAT to support the housing crisis, particularly in relation to refurbishments? What can we do to support the tourism sector? And there's another question on that, Benny, which you might want to tie the two together, but somebody else has asked, is Scotland's business too focused on tourism, and do we need to rebalance this?
Yeah, well, look, I think I really believe that tourism and hospitality and the related industries are absolutely key to what Scotland stands for in the years to come. So if we don't, not looking at a year or two, but if we look at 5, 10 years, I think we've got to make sure we've got a fit for purpose tourism and hospitality sector. I think it's a really important part of what Scotland can be. And of course, it's one of the sectors that's taking such a jolt. So there will have to be interventions. I mean, in the report, I mean, at the moment with the fiscal framework, VAT is not devolved, and therefore the only way there would be a VAT change, unless we change the framework, is for the UK government to take the lead on it. The suggestion is to drop general VAT to 15, but then to have bigger targeted reductions in areas that we think would benefit most from it. So I'd probably take VAT down to about 5% for sectors that are really being hit hard, that we think need to have a chance of recovery. So I think that's really important. The other thing is one of the recommendations in the report is that we convene a conversation between government and the banks and other investors. And this would be some kind of SME recovery fund, where I think at the moment, the banks have gone for what they would describe as universal forbearance. The money that's gone out the door in terms of the bounce back loans, I mean, I know from some of my former colleagues in banks that they can literally sit and watch the money just go into the account and straight back out the account. It's not really even been working capital. I don't blame people for doing it. I guess that if they had the chance, it was always going to happen. But that can't get repeated. And I think the banks are probably not in a great place where they've got to view what do they do next May. I suspect there's about 40% of businesses that have taken loans that don't even have any intention of paying back. And so there has to be much more targeted intervention. And so there will be support and forbearance. But it's really the businesses that, I think what we've got to think through, Graham, is what businesses do we need to survive and which businesses can thrive on the other side. And one of the issues about Scotland, even in terms of inward investment, we've been guilty at times of chasing down every opportunity and not being sort of choiceful about it. Prioritisation is going to be one of the most important things that we've got to get right. And prioritisation's bedfellow is deprioritisation, and that's hard. I always say, you probably heard me say this even at our wealth board meetings, it's easy to say what you're going to be good at and what you're going to do. It's a bit harder sometimes to say things that you're actually deliberately not going to do. And we're going to have to work that through. So is there too much focus on tourism and hospitality? To be honest, I think there's going to be a lot of businesses that are going to struggle to come back. So I think it will possibly be a smaller sector, but I think it needs to be we need it to come back stronger. There's definitely an issue that travel may become more of a premium activity. And one of the things we have to think through is, does Scotland have the right kind of premium tourism and hospitality sector? And it has in part, but I think it needs to be focused.
Yeah, great. I guess a slight extension of that, maybe somebody's asked if you have a view on what sectors will be really key to the recovery.
Yeah, I do. I think the financial services sector generally, Scotland's got a good track record there. I think we can maintain our momentum. That's one. The renewables. I think we've just got to. In the report we talk about, can we not lower standards, but can we look at how we can make it easier to get things done quickly? If we're going to do offshore wind, does it need to take 10 years? Now, some people will throw their hands up in horror at that, but frankly, I think this is a time for us to do things that would have been unthinkable. So I think we've got to get on with stuff. I think investing in the digital infrastructure is one of the very important supportive things. But another sector is the university sector. It's hugely important. I think tourism and hospitality and related things like food and drink. I mean, I had a session with the Scottish Salmon Association about a week or so ago. They were telling me that in Scotland, Scotland's gone from being responsible for 10% share of salmon worldwide to 6% in the last few years, and it's really because the regulation has got in the way of what they would consider productivity gains. And so places like Norway, for example, have moved on. And I think there's got to be just we should be, Scottish salmon we've every right for it to be held up alongside Scottish whisky is something that is we're well known for. And I do believe we've just got to be prepared to look very closely at some of the rules and regulations and planning that slows things down. Or I'm no expert in regulatory matters around salmon, but I'm sure if other countries are able to make it go better and make it more productive, then we should be able to do so too.
Great. I guess turning to the report and the fact you're recognising that all of this support comes at huge cost, and ultimately that needs to be paid for in one way or another. There's a couple of questions, one around devolved tax raising powers as it relates to, I suppose, more the foreign investment or indeed domestic investment into Scotland, where having different or higher tax rates don't attract either the right people or the right businesses compared to the rest of the UK. And the other ones, if we were to do something different, what should that look like from an investment perspective in tax raising powers?
Yeah, so at the moment, the fiscal framework only allows Scotland to borrow 0.3% of GDP, which is 450 million. And the example I gave on Monday was, if you're looking around at what might be necessary, you need to look no further than the German economy, which has got a track record of getting some of these things right. And they're talking about, they've spent a whole load of money on the emergency actions, much like we have in the UK. But they've set out to say that they're going to have a fiscal stimulus of 130 billion euros, which is 4% of their GDP. So 4% of our GDP in Scotland would be 6 billion. It's quite interesting. Fraser Valander Institute, that's been actually slightly, they've at times been a wee bit irritating about this report, but they went to the trouble of doing all their numbers and come up with 7 billion. So I don't know if that moves the argument forward very far, but the point is, I think 6 is in the right ballpark, and it's where the conversation needs to start. I don't think there's any realistic prospect of changing the fiscal framework quickly. So I think what we've got to do is go to persuade government in Westminster to raise 90 billion stimulus and give us our 6. So I think that's the sort of stimulus point. There's another little, I think I mentioned it on Monday, so if anybody was watching they would have heard, but there's a very immediate little arcane rule that we might get, I would go for getting temporary relief from, and it is that if you've got a capital underspend, you're not allowed to spend it on revenue projects. Now, in old money, that is probably saying, capital projects are for the long run and for the sort of, if you like, the structure of the economy, whereas spending just, you spend it and you don't get anything back for it. Now, because of the COVID-19 situation, there's been obviously quite a significant underspend on capital with construction and stuff having to stop. And I haven't been able to get the number out of government, but my best guess, having sort of gone around the subject a bit, is there's probably about 500 million of underspend. And I would just give it to, I would spend it on education. I'd give kids that suffer from digital poverty, a device. I would just spend 500 million, but we would need to get a release on that. But I think this is the sort of circumstances where something, again, unthinkable could happen. On tax, there was a few subjects I steered clear of on the report, and I'll own up to them. One was the NHS. I thought if I got into the NHS, I'd never get back out of the subject. Another was independence, where there were some business leaders were saying to me, you should make a recommendation that the independence debate gets put on hold for 5 years or something. And the third one was taxation in terms of funding. And the reason I sort of steered clear of them is I was quite worried that very good and very extensive recommendations could get thrown under a bus, because all everybody would be saying is that I was, all the people on either side of the debate would just have wanted to focus on me saying, a wealth tax or reduced tax or, all of that, and likewise with independence. So what we did do is, on the taxation front, we steered clear of talking about what we need to do to raise funding but we focused more on interventions that were tax related. So that was the VAT, and also that for SMEs, if we could get a tax incentive for the adoption of digital. SMEs in Scotland have been very slow to adopt digital, and this crisis has shown that digital is a key part of resilience. Hi there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Digital was a key part of this, Benny.
Sorry?
Did you say digital was a key part of this?
Well, I think this is me just trying to demonstrate how important it is. So yeah, but SMEs have been slow to adopt digital, and I think if we can, if we could give them an incentive to do that, that would be good. And I think for inward investment, we do have to put a better foot forward for Scotland. I think I tell you what, I was quite disappointed in, to be quite candid. I thought that when I asked the people who I thought had been working on inward investment, I would get a whole bunch of plans that they were just wishing people would get on with, and I'm afraid there weren't strong enough plans. So I think we've started to make progress, but I was a bit disappointed there wasn't oven-ready stuff on that.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of questions around. You touch on it in your report, coronavirus job retention scheme, and further support being available for certain industries, and I think that's probably something that Scottish Government particularly, are thinking about at the moment. Along with other aspects of this. But if I can finish with one question, Benny, around just in general, get your views on this at final. I think the report's got some very interesting and informative information within it, the question says, and it's touching on what Fiona Hislop has said this week about economic revolution, building back better, taking everyone with us. And the question is, how do you think we turn these and your report into action?
Yeah, so I actually had a call last night with Fiona Hislop, and I said to her, I think the symbolism is very important here. She wants to hold the report together, actually, which is quite interesting. She doesn't want to just let it get, kind of kicked into a whole bunch of different projects. I mean, it will have to, because some of them are very big ones. But let's take something like the Scottish Guarantee Job Scheme for 16 to 26-year-olds. I think that I would like to see somebody get picked out of the private sector in the next week to 10 days to be told that they are going to be responsible for this and start the dialogue with organisations. I think we should just do that. I think that an open commitment to start to accelerate things like the R100, the rural digital improvements, just announce that it's going to be going faster. I think that if we could make very clear to Westminster that we do need to have fiscal stimulus. I think also on something like extended furlough on a prioritised basis, because we can't afford to just carry on doing it the way we are. I really see an opportunity here to do quite a lot of things quite quickly. Some things are going to be harder. You saw that I talked about repurposing of North Sea apparatus for carbon capture and storage. That's been an idea that's been around, but let's do it. And let's move the economic development stuff. Let's get the Scottish Enterprise High Opportunity North East, South of Scotland Enterprise Partnership. Let's get them together in the next couple of weeks. Let's start talking about how they're going to change the way they do things. I'm actually quite excited by what's possible. What I've realised is that government actually want to use this as a launchpad to get on with stuff, and I think they want to get on with it in the right way. And one of the other interesting things was, talking to a very broad church and doing this report, Graham, there were a lot of people surprised at me talking about the third sector being important, talking about trust in society being important. But this really is an opportunity for us to pull the strands of Scottish society together. This morning I was being interviewed actually about what the future of the cultural sector is and the creative sector in Scotland. I think that's a sector that matters a lot to what Scotland stands for. We've got an amazing heritage. We've got, for a country of our size, we punch way above our weight in that creative sector. And interestingly enough, one of my recommendations was that obviously the creative sector has to get together. But my report went out on the 22nd on Monday. On the 24th, Joanna Baker with Fiona Hislop's, approval, has launched a national partnership for the creative sector. So, interesting enough, the first action that's been taken is the creative sector, which you wouldn't necessarily have thought was likely. But I think the symbolism of getting on with it, and somehow over the next few weeks they're going to have to get their head around how they pull it all together. And I think they're looking for some advice from me on that.
Benny, I'm going to take control back over of the webinar now, but I'll just finish by saying thank you very much, as always, in our conversations and now in the wider conversation with the clients and friends of the firm. Your candidness is what comes through. Your integrity and honesty around where you think things should go is fantastic, and it's really appreciated for you to share some of the more detailed thoughts that went into the report with everyone this morning. So Benny, thank you very much for doing that for us. For everybody else, technology always plays a part. It will play a part in the future going forward. Apologies if we went missing for a little while, but thankfully we managed to capture everything and finish off. Thanks to all of you for your questions and for joining us this morning. It's much appreciated, and I look forward to catching up with many of you when things we're able to do that. So thanks very much, everybody, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and the weekend. Thank you.